Hey guys, Montel here, and welcome to this edition of Free Thinking with Montel. My guest today knows there are many parents who struggle daily to protect their children dealing with epilepsy and other illnesses. In her new book, A Petit Mal, a mother's healing song, love song, she offers inspiration, knowledge, and a protective friend to others on the same path. She's a first-generation Columbian-American poet, artist, and author who graduated magna cum laude from Harvard University and was a finalist for the Academy of American Poets Prize. And Maria Caballero, thank you so much for joining us today on Free Thinking with Montel.
Hello, how are you? It's an honor to be here. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to speak with you.
Great. No, thank you. And thank you for sharing so much for so many. Look, paint a picture for us about your life, what your life was before your son's diagnosis.
Well, we were just, I guess, a normal family. My husband and I, we have two children, Lorenzo, who's the boy who was ill, and my daughter, who's younger by 3 years. And, hardworking parents. We both work full time, in addition to having, artistic pursuits, authors, and, sports, exercise, trying to stay healthy. And it was a real shock when my son started having seizures totally out of the blue when he was 6 years old.
6 years old. Just so you know, for 100% complete disclosure, I've talked about it on my podcast multiple times before. I had a child who was a victim and suffered from adolescent onset epilepsy. Hers started at around 8. And I've been through, and she's now quite into her, I won't give out her full age, but she's in her late 30s. And she has spent a lifetime living through, I'm telling you, the ups and downs, and several of them the downsides of epilepsy as a young child. So I do understand what you've gone through. So at age 6, what was his first symptoms?
He started with laughing seizures, Montel. So it was really eerie because he would just start kind of giggling out of the blue. And so at first, we didn't even think of it. And then, you kind of look closer and you look closer. And then it's like, is he happy or is something going on? And then he started reaching for something to hold on to. So it was a progressive kind of seizure. There's so many different types of seizures, which is something that I really discuss in my book. People always think that it's, the poltergeist seizure on the floor, you're writhing, and that's all there is to it. When you say epilepsy, that's the initial sort of image that people have, which is one of the stigmas, of course, associated with the disorder, with the condition. But my son had laughing seizure. They're actually called gelastic seizures. And then he started losing his balance. He would reach for something, a table, a wall, anything. And I remember the minute where I realized that I had to take him to the hospital was, it was still pretty mild, but we were playing soccer actually at the park, and he stopped and there was nothing for him to hold on to. And he sat down, and that never happened. And he was laughing and he sat down, and I'm like, what happened? And he's like, oh, I just felt like I was going to fall, and, thought nothing of it. And his seizures, some seizures afterwards leave the person exhausted or disoriented. He would just pick right up, like he wouldn't miss a beat. But after this, he was running after the ball. I said, no, stop. We're going home. And, I packed a bag for the hospital knowing it would be a while.
Right. And at that age, I'm sure that you went through the same difficulty that I did trying to get a diagnosis. I mean, because, there, and you said it clearly, there are so many different forms of epilepsy. It covers, it takes so many different courses. My daughters started with what they call auras, though she never had laughing seizures that I can remember, but she would have these things that are called auras, where she would literally just freeze in conversation. I give you the impression that the computer stopped, but I mean, she would literally just freeze. And you look at her and go, okay, she wouldn't answer you, okay, and she'd spark. and then she'd look at you, and it scared her because when she was younger, she couldn't understand what was going on, that her brain would just like stop. The first time I really thought that there was something strange for something, or something was going on, was that she was walking up out of a pool, and she stopped on like the second step up. Her torso down to her knees was out of the water, and she just stopped, like frozen, as if she was getting ready to take another step, but she couldn't take that other step. And when she kind of came out of it about 20 seconds later, it was so unnerving to her that it made her flop down in the pool. And then she climbed out of the pool and she sat down and she started crying. And I was like, "What's going on?" She goes, "I don't know what's wrong with me." And I was like, "Wait a minute." And then from that moment on, we took her to the hospital and took her to the doctors, and then chased diagnosis for almost a full year and a half. Was that the same kind of thing you went through when you went to the doctors first
Yeah,
time?
very, very similar. And I'm sorry to hear what you went through. I've been there. I speak about auras actually in my book, and how auras is a sign that, the seizure is coming on. And sometimes it can serve as a warning when the seizure can be particularly severe, can actually be something helpful. My son didn't have auras, but I definitely, it was something that we were very, very aware of. When we took him to the hospital, it was really disorienting to be faced with the way the doctors, first of all, speak about epilepsy, and then try to patronize you as a parent, as a patient. I have to say that was one of the most frustrating aspects about the whole experience because,
Let me say, I will agree with you 100% on that, but go right ahead.
they say, first of all, they say, don't look online, don't educate yourself, is basically what they're saying. But then they also don't give you answers. So as a parent, of course, you're looking for something. And, we were in the hospital, Montel, for 3 days. They ran all sorts of tests, like terrifying tests, for a child, for a parent. And at the end, they gave us this medication. They gave us two medications at the end. One was one that you put up the butt if the seizure is too strong and the patient's throat closes. And, they make you watch a video and show parents like bracing a child that's convulsing, in a really traumatic way. They make you all watch it, and then they give you the medication, which is this, huge package plastic apparatus that you have to insert up the anus. And then they gave us another medication, which we of course looked up, and it has all these, toxicity warnings and side effects. And so we're like, okay, so this is epilepsy. They're like, just give him the medication, and if the seizures stop, then we'll know they were seizures.
And I recall that, but unfortunately, back in the time, this is a couple of decades ago, science hadn't even gotten to where they are today. And back then, it was literally just a roulette wheel of, let's figure out which medication we'll put her on to start. I mean, literally spin the wheel. Oh, let's start with this one. Well, now let's start with this one. Well, let's go to this one. So my young child from about age 10 and a half on probably went through 20 different medications, none of which really did much to help, but helped addict her, which was really a bigger problem that we ended up running into because, she felt like, if they're just going to drug me, then I may as well drug myself.
That's terrifying. And, we also were living in Florida at the time. So I also understand the fear of the pool, the water. I mean, when you speak about the experience about the pool, with seizures, what the doctors at least told us, Montel, is that the danger wasn't actually the seizure, but what the patient is doing when they're having a seizure. So if they're in a swimming pool, if they're in a bathtub, if they're riding a bicycle, all the kind of things, or they're in the monkey bars at the playground, all the kinds of things that a child, an adult, a teenager does, it's the while you're doing it that's dangerous. And
Absolutely.
all the activities that precludes in a normal life, you can't even begin to imagine until you're actually faced with the prohibition of them. And it's
you just know a lot of people just do not understand. And, for a long period of time, I had issues even with other family members trying to get them to understand it. She's not ignoring you. If that's what she did at that moment, she probably was in the middle of one of these auras. Now, fortunate. I don't even want to use the word fortunate, but for my child, she only had in the first 5 or 6 years. I'm telling you, I think she only had maybe one or two what would be considered Petit Mal seizures, where she literally locked up and she ribbed around for a little while, and then she stopped, and she would. It was almost as if she was trying to control, trying to see if whatever last bit of reality that she could understand herself. She was trying to control it, but then she would literally. They would last a minute. Sometimes they would last about a minute and a half, but she would come out of it, and it would be so disorienting to her that it would send her into like an immediate depression, which we found and I found very difficult to deal with because, how do you explain to a child that the child that young that there's something wrong, but we're going to be able to help you with it. Let us just get you to a doctor. And then, you keep saying there's something wrong, but when she goes to the doctor and she leaves the doctor and the doctor gives her medication, this still happens.
I know, that's really frustrating. And I feel like my experience too was, we were looking for answers. We wanted to run more tests. And the doctor just kept handing me this flyer for epilepsy camp. And so it's like they want to just sort of put you in a category and literally separate you, categorize you, and put you there instead of really trying to find a solution. And what I found so disheartening more than anything was the lack of questions that I was being asked. Not once did they ask me, what does your son eat? What does he do? What are his typical activities? Has he had any kind of, sudden life change, so grandmother dying? I mean, there was not a single question asked. It was just run tests, medicate, and out you go to epilepsy camp.
Right. And as if they are trying to just get that patient off their docket rather than trying to help you heal that patient. My daughter went through a significantly rough period of time when she hit her. How old is your son now?
He's turning 11.
Okay. You have so much more in front of you. I mean, how do I explain it other than to say, and not to be fearful, but, you have to keep and monitor every one of his hormonal changes because his hormonal changes will impact his epilepsy. There's no question. I mean, that's one that I think I've through my years of research trying to figure out every time a child hits one of those milestones, a young boy, when he just hits puberty, then once he has been in puberty for a little period of time and testosterone starts kicking in. And, by the time he hits 15, 16, it's going to change. By the time he hits 17, 18, it's going to change. By the time he hits 21, it's going to change. And but then I say that, but then not necessarily for every child. It's the same. It's really so bizarre. I mean, I went through periods of time with my daughter where, one doctor would literally completely contradict what the other doctor had said. Completely contradict it. Then he'd come back and say, well, this part. And I said, well, that's what the other doctor said. Well, he was wrong. What do you mean he was wrong? You go back and tell me it's the same thing he said. Well, but, I think we ought to try this medication since this one wasn't working. And unfortunately, I don't know. A lot of the medications that they use for children who are epileptic were not drugs designed for children. They were drugs designed for post-adolescent, 17, 18 and above. And most of them were really used for 18-year-olds and above. And so now you put a 13-year-old on a drug that you think a 18-year-old can at least psychologically understand. They don't. So now my child's thinking that in her own mind, because, she's continuing to go to school, she's continuing to do her thing. She hears things about this particular drug or that particular drug, how it gets you high or it doesn't get you high. Now she thinks she's high, but she's not high. It was just one of the most disturbing periods of time from probably her 13 until she was, for me, it was really a tough period for her from 13 to 19, 13 almost to 20. Because once she hit the age 18, then, and right before 18, I think, some other kid probably turned her on to or told her about, well, it's the same as this drug. So if you take that drug, it'd be just as beneficial. So then she honestly started experimenting with drugs herself that were counterintuitive to the drugs that the doctors had prescribed. and it really made it worse. And then there was a period of time when she ended up, it seemed as if her auras started to slow down, and then she started having drop seizures, which was really bizarre. And then that continued for just a short period of time, and then that stopped, and she went back to Petit Mals, and then she went back to auras. And then, we did things, we were doing things together. I was a big snowboarder, and my child is a big snowboarder too, because of course she was with me. But now, did I really think through that whole process of going down a mountain and the possibility of her having vertigo in the middle of one of those, auras? And fortunately, I say fortunately, I believe that only happened a couple of times. By the time I realized that, oh my God, I think that could be putting her in danger, then, now she's at an age where she's like, you ain't gonna tell me what to do. This is what I'm gonna do. It's like, oh, and so we went through a really, 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 it's an ever changing landscape as they age. And even now to today, my child has finally become an adult. She's married. She has a child of her own. She has expressed the thought that she's probably gone through, though I think she's kind of now, fortunately for some who have adolescent onset epilepsy, they do kind of grow out of it. They never really grow completely out of it, but they grow into a period of time where it all slows down, where they don't have them as frequently. But I got to tell you something, I even not even understanding the disease as well as I should have and thought I did, we ended up, in our mid 20s, we went to an amusement park and did a ride that I didn't even realize that this ride could trigger that. And, and now with the motion pictures and the way they do motion pictures these days, she's got to be careful of sitting in a theater, because a theater, the way the lights and the images are flashed at you, and they're subliminal images, and there's so many subliminal images and light flashes before an explosion and things like that to prep you for that. She has had some issues in theaters along the way, even in her late 20s, early 30s. Now she's moved into her 30s, and we've only spoken about it once, but I've asked her, how are you doing? And she's like, I, I think it's settled, but every once in a while she'll have an aura even now.
Wow. Yeah, I know it's a lifelong process, but I think our son is doing really great, in part because we really paid a lot of attention to other, forms of healing. We really cleaned up his diet. We really made sure that he started eating in a very different way. And I think, we prepped his body for health to the point where his seizures fully stopped.
Congratulations! Wow.
Yeah, I know that we have to be aware of hormonal changes. I'm really, it's coming actually. It's coming soon, fast and furious. But for now, he's in a really great spot. And also, we weaned him off the medication very slowly, and they haven't come back. So we're all really vigilant, and ready for whatever, because the type of epilepsy that he has was finally diagnosed after a similar experience as you had, where the doctors were reversing each other and then even themselves, inverting diagnoses themselves on their own diagnoses. But he has dysplasia, which is actually known as a structural epilepsy, because it's caused by an imperfection in the brain. It's like a little mole in the brain that's formed in utero. And that can only really be removed via surgery if need be. But it's a highly medication resistant form of epilepsy. And, fortunately, the medication that he was given finally, after we explored so many different types, because we wouldn't give him the one that they wanted to give him right away. We really just did our research, and we did the research sort of against the tide. We weren't invited. We weren't provided information. We had to do that all on our own. All the questioning, all the asking, we did it all on our own. And finally, we arrived at a medication that felt right for us. And that was the medication that I think really helped him. But we also pursued dietary, other forms of healing, Montel. And I really just encourage parents to trust their gut and ask questions. And if it doesn't feel right, feel free to wait.
Yeah. And from a family's perspective, how did this whole thing right there, when the initial diagnosis took place, how did that affect your family?
I mean, I really felt like everyone sort of took their turn falling apart. But in a way, as the mother, you sort of become the caretaker not only to the child, but the caretaker to everyone's worries. So you're like the caretaker and the reporter, right? Because everyone's calling and everyone wants information all the time, and you don't always have information to give, and it's a task to, the uncles call, the grandparents call, the cousins call, the friends call, and of course it's all so welcome, and it comes from such a good place that you want to honor it. But it is more doing this, right? It's more breath that you have to devote to when you don't even have it yourself. Because my son started having night seizures too, so sleep became really precious. Energy became precious in the household. But I felt like I just have like this sort of resilient positivism within me, that I never really sunk. I think my husband was much more desperate than I was. I always felt like it's going to be okay. Like, we'll figure out how to live with this, no matter how it evolves. We're going to figure it out.
And now you did say his particular type of epilepsy being a physical manifestation inside the brain. This is something that's going to be there for the rest of his life, correct?
Correct. He's
Have,
got.
have you seen cases where that abnormality has kind of just dissolved on its own, or no?
When we weaned him off the medication, and we were really resistant to doing it, was actually, the doctor was like, because what happened was he was little when the medication started, and then COVID hit. And so that was 2 years without a doctor, basically, and 2 years without his medication being adjusted. And he grew from, a 7-year-old boy to a 9-year-old boy. It's a huge moment of growth. And when we finally went back to the doctor, they said, the medication level you're giving him is subtherapeutic. This is not doing anything. You can wean him off. And we were so scared. We were like, no way. There's no way we're weaning him off medication. Again, we're in Florida. There's pools. There's no way. But then, we did. We weaned him off the medication. And then once, the doctor knew that it wasn't doing anything, the doctor said, there's no medical explanation for why his seizures went away. I can't explain it to you. They just did.
Wow. And so now, at that point in time, had you already transitioned over to trying to find some sort of alternative medicine or alternative medical practices?
We did it from the time of diagnosis. As soon as his seizure started, I started searching for alternative methods of treating him right away.
And did you find any of those alternative methods helped?
I think in my book I write about how I think that his healing and his journey is a combination of, not the thing, but the combination of. And I really feel like the combination of holistic medicine with, sort of energetic, because he was definitely, too much on screens and too much on video games. That coupled with finding the right medication is what ultimately led to his well-being.
So Anna, let's talk a little bit about, you were saying like, he started having issues with sleep while he's sleeping at night. Just for those people who are tuned in and trying to understand what they could do, what did you do and what did your family do when he started having seizures at night?
We really just started taking turns with my husband, sleeping with him. So I don't know if that's good or bad advice, but we just took turns so that at least we were each getting one full night of sleep, every other night. But we weren't comfortable leaving him alone. The doctors sort of told us that it was fine, that, as long as he wasn't falling off the bed, he would be okay. We had seizures at night, but it was just too eerie for us to leave him alone.
Mm-hmm. And then, so you stopped the medication. Talk a little bit about some of the alternative things that you did that other people could also look at and see if they could get some relief from.
Well, when he first got sick, we cut out all sugar, we cut out all gluten, we cut out because there are actually seizures that have been found to be caused by gluten, by sugar. There's a lot of there's so many different types of seizures, and as you experienced, getting a diagnosis can take a lot of time. So we just wanted to cut out food related complications if we could. And so, we really just kind of locked ourselves in the house and huddled in, no eating out, no birthday parties, none of the things, a 6-year-old boy or child does to avoid temptation. We didn't want him eating dairy. We really just cleaned up our diet to a really, really sort of extreme case without going full keto, because of course the keto diet has also been used by many epileptic patients and with great result. It's one of the treatments that are out there for epilepsy, the keto diet. For some reason, it helps with certain types of seizures. But we really did all the all the dietary changes that we could do without going full keto. We also did acupuncture, and we also did a lot of homeopathy to balance him out as much as possible. Um, and we also went to a lot of spiritual doctors to do some energy work on him, and that I think also helped. We did a parasite. There's a virus called Epstein-Barr, which is the mononucleosis virus, and it's believed to be the cause of many also autoimmune immune diseases if left unchecked. And we found him; he had Epstein-Barr virus. So we also, worked with someone to treat that the viral remains, to remove them from his body. So lots of things that maybe most parents would probably not be comfortable trying. Lots of different, strange sounding treatments. But Montel, I always say that I think it really was the combination of everything that we did that healed him in a way that doctors couldn't explain. Ultimately, Western doctors.
And this was all done. You had to figure this out. There's no guide. There's no reference book. There's no one website fits all.
Nothing. There's nothing. I mean, there's something called the International League Against Epilepsy, which sounds like a great, superhero type organization, and it's out there. It's a website. It's got a lot of information, but a lot of the information it's more like a glossary. Almost, you're just learning the language of epilepsy, because doctors don't necessarily give it to you either. And diagnosis reports and medical reports are really hard to read. We also did genetic testing, and fortunately, I have a friend of a friend works at a DNA lab and sat down with us and had coffee and explained it to us. And that's why I was able to write a 300-page book about our experience, is because we went through so many different doorways.
Let's talk about the book again. Give me the title. Where can people find it?
So it's called A Petit Mal, which of course is a type of seizure, but a petit mal also, is French for a little bad. And when you're with a child in a children's hospital, you see a lot of really traumatizing things. And I always sort of felt grateful for the bad that we had, in a way, because you see others that are suffering in ways that are greater, and my heart always went out to them. So the book is called A Petit Mal. It's available, in every bookstore. On Amazon, of course, barnesandnoble.com too. My website is my name, and you can find it through there as well. Mariacaballero.com. And it really just tells my story in like almost obsessive detail. And I think that, it can really help people going through what I went through.
And can people reach out to you if they have questions? Do you answer questions?
I mean, within reason, of course, we all do. We all do within reason, of course. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I don't feel like I can give somebody medical advice. I can only share my experience and hope that it helps others.
And what advice do you feel comfortable giving other parents who are dealing with chronic illness of a child?
I think it's educate yourself. If you don't feel the doctors are giving you the right answers, or even answers that justify sort of what you're going through, don't be afraid to ask questions and to really find out for yourself. Go to different doctors, ask for second, for third opinions. Go on the internet. They're going to tell you not to, but go on the internet and
I do not understand. They don't want you to go on the internet because they don't want you coming and asking them questions that they don't have the answers to.
right. But there's a way to say we don't know, right? There's a way to say medicine doesn't have an answer for that yet. Because sometimes the way that you're told we don't know makes it feel like we don't want to tell you.
Yeah, too often I think doctors they get this false sense that they're gods, and they feel as if they're inept if they don't have an answer to every question that you have to ask them, where no one expects them to know everything.
Yeah, I spoke with a lot of doctors that weren't, child brain doctors, and they all said, I would have never gone into that field. It's such a crazy field to go into because the brain is already such a mystery, and a child's brain is even more of a mystery because it's so still undefined. But that's what you want to hear. You want to hear it's like, we don't know yet. We don't want to hear is medicate, go to epilepsy camp. Good luck to you.
Right, right. Can you talk a little bit about how emotionally draining this has been for you and your family, and what have you done to help the family and help yourself?
Well, I think writing the book, honestly, I wrote the book not even expecting it to be published, Montel. I mean, I'm a writer, I'm a poet, I've written other books, but I just started writing furiously about my experience. I started keeping, notes with everything the doctors were saying, quoting them. I started keeping notes also with what he ate. How many seizures did he have? How long did they last? Was he laughing hard? Was he laughing soft? I mean, it was just this process of documenting that I think was my way of coping.
And how's your son doing now?
Thank you for asking. He's doing really great. Honestly, we're really grateful. He's prepubescent. Adolescence will bring a change in hormones, as you've mentioned so wisely, and we have to keep our eyes open. But right now, he's doing great.
And did you have you kind of limited some of the things that he looks at from screens or from, I don't know if he has any little play toys or things like that or a cell phone or anything like that. But have you been limiting some of his access to that?
We have like, I guess, a limit on screen time. He doesn't have a phone or anything like that. I think he's too little for one personally, um, but he does watch video games and he does watch TV. I would say like a normal child. So it's like every, evening, a little while. Um, so, we're back to normal, I would say, to normal levels. Like we've definitely eased up.
You have you. I don't know if you've noticed, even in watching television now, sometimes you will come across a movie and there will be a disclaimer at the beginning of that movie, right? You've seen those, and so I think that's something I like to point out to a lot of people. When you see that, that means that put the brakes on. That's something that you probably don't want your child. You don't want to experiment because that experimentation may end up causing from a Petit Mal to a grandma. You don't have any idea what's going to happen. In a lot of these movies, they've Hollywood's not kept the viewers up to date on what they've been doing. But back 20 years ago, some of the techniques that they're using right now in movies were outlawed because putting flashes and putting things before a scene where they want to make you scared. Well, those flashes are there. Your conscious eye doesn't notice it. Your subconscious eye does. And those are the things that can trigger a response inside the brain that we're not really that well up on yet. I don't think, science is, doctors have really kept track of how detrimental this can be to the brain.
Agreed. I mean, yeah, I think it's something that you always have to be vigilant about. But at the same time, I also want him to have a normal life and watch Marvel movies and play with his friends, on Minecraft or whatever they're playing on. Um, because I think that I was really worried after we sort of came out of his diagnosis and treatment that he was kind of traumatized from all the doctors and the fear and just, that experience getting out. He was pulled out of school all the time. He couldn't participate in sports. So, I definitely wanted and still do want like normalcy for him, that he, doesn't feel there's something wrong with him.
Sure thing, no, for sure. But I mean, at the same time, you also want to be a little bit more, I guess, more protective, so that you don't fall into that process or fall into something where you let them do something that could trigger an event, and then woe is me. Why did I let them do that to begin with? That's not the process. But I mean, I like to tell parents, especially parents who talk about this issue, to be very vigilant, especially because, again, my child, it didn't start affecting her until her mid 20s, where all of a sudden she would walk out of a theater and think, I probably missed a few minutes of that movie because she was in the middle of an aura and she didn't even know it, because something, the flashes hit her so in such a strange way that she can't even explain it now, how that affects her. But I think what it does is it causes maybe the lowest level seizure that she could have, that just puts her in loss of time.
Yeah.
And then when she pops out of it, well, now will that loss of time 2 or 3 times in one movie cause something greater after the movie? We don't know. I mean, I literally, have you ever been to Vegas?
Years ago. I mean, I guess so.
Well, I'll tell you a crazy story. I and my child and my wife, we literally went to, there's that needle, there's the needle, I can't remember the name of the hotel. It's the highest point in Vegas. They used to do bungee jumping off of that. Okay. Well, like an idiot, of course, my child, a daredevil like her dad, let's go do that. Come on, let's go do it together. And I was like, you don't want to do that. Yeah, I do. And even when we were walking through the line, it said people who suffer from, seizures or different things, this may be very cautious, or you may not even want to do this. And she was like, I'm going to be fine. It's okay. Okay, great. So we jumped, we did it, landed. She said, let's do it again. And I was like, no, I think one's enough. No, let's do it again. And this is a person in the mid 20s. This is not my child. This is an adult. So I said, okay, let's do it again. We did it the second time, hit the ground. They unharnessed us. We walked inside, probably took 20 steps away from that device. She hit the floor. She had a full blown grand mal seizure that lasted about 45, 50 seconds. And I was like, why did I even let you do that? Now, of course, as an adult, I can't stop you from doing this, but it's things like that. I mean, there's enough information out there now to let you know that there are certain things that can trigger, petit mals, that can trigger auras. Pay very close attention to those, because out of the blue, and she hadn't, at the time of this happened, she probably hadn't had a seizure for like 4 years. And then boom, we do this one event, comes back, and then for the next year and a half, 2 years, she's dealing with, auras and other things for a couple of years, and then it's still slowly abated. So, I'd be very cautious of that, and believe in the warning signs.
You're so right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, you can't ever think that it's over, because especially, in my case, it's structural.
Right,
Got
right.
something in his brain that has triggered seizures in the past, and it could again.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
we wish you so well. I mean, I wish you and your son just the brightest future you could possibly have. I think one of the things that I think I also ought to say, that to those people out there that are suffering this way, this has nothing to do with your child's intellectual ability. So make sure you understand that. Just because your child has seizures doesn't mean that there's something, that structural damage to the brain is a structural damage to the things that causes seizures. It's not what causes intelligence. So your
Correct.
child is just as intelligent as any other child. It's just a child who has an issue. So let them seek out as much as they can for that brain. I've I've heard from people saying, this is going to sound a little odd. Heard and read. I think it wasn't a lot of articles, but a few, that more intellectual stimulation does seem to impact, especially in those who have auras and things like that. It's almost like the busy brain enjoys the busy brain more. So, I mean, it'd be kind of a cool thing to let your son know that, the the more he studies and the harder he studies and the more he puts in that brain could help him in his future.
That's a wonderful thing to tell a child.
Absolutely, it is. It's one of those things where, rather than think, well, I'm working too hard, studying too hard. No. Maybe just study a little harder. Just add a little bit, add an extra couple pages. That's all you got to do. It may help you. And it's a wonderful thing to tell them, but it may end up helping in the long run. Well, look, I wish you well. I've been through. I don't know if I could say I've been through everything you've been through, but we've been through a lot, and we share the same journey. And the one good thing about it is that with my child, it has not stopped her from living her fullest life. And she's living her fullest life right now. She has her own child. She enjoys that child, and she also has her own career, and she has been doing well. So there is a future there. So you don't have to worry about maybe down the road something being an impediment. It may not be that big of an impediment. It may just be like we see those humps in the road. You come along a speed bump, go over the speed bump, let's go on to the next one.
I completely agree. And, I wish you and your family the best as well. Thank you for sharing your story with me. I know it's hard to talk about it sometimes.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing with all of us. We really enjoyed having you today. And anytime in the future, if you want to come back and have another session because you stumble upon something else, or you want to know a little bit more, or you want to be able to share a little bit more, please don't hesitate to do so. We'd love to have you back, Anna, okay?
That's really generous. Thank you so much. I appreciate this moment together.
Absolutely. For sure. Thank you.
Have
You
a
stay
great-
well. Great holiday to you and your family. And to all of you out there, the same great holiday. And let's make sure that you tune in for the next Free Thinking with Montel. Thanks for joining me on Free Thinking with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback, so please send us your comments.